The slap rang out like a pistol shot in the quiet first-class cabin. Captain James Sterling, 20 years with Airlines, had just struck a passenger. His wedding ring left a cut on the black woman's lip. Blood dripped onto her white napkin, spreading across the airline's golden logo. The other passengers froze. Someone filmed with their phone while another turned away, unable to watch what might come next. Above them, Aura's motto mocked the scene. Excellence above all. The woman carefully folded the bloody napkin, her movements deliberate and unhurried despite the sting of her split lip. No tears, no outrage, just a peculiar calm that seemed to fill the cabin like a change in air pressure. "Captain Sterling," she said quietly, "you've made a terrible mistake." Something in her voice made him step back, made the watching passengers lean forward. This wasn't the reaction of a victim. It was something else entirely, something that made Sterling's uniform suddenly feel too tight around his collar. The woman smiled then, blood still on her lip. The cabin fell silent except for the hum of engines carrying them through the night sky. 12 witnesses caught between intervention and self-preservation because in first class, nobody wants to be the one who makes things worse. Patricia Morrison, chief flight attendant for 15 years, stood frozen in the galley doorway, having handled medical emergencies, unruly drunks, even a berth at 35,000 feet, but never seeing a captain strike a passenger. Her hands trembled as she gripped the service cart, watching blood seep through the white napkin pressed to the woman's mouth, while her mind raced through protocols that didn't cover this. "Security threat," Captain Sterling announced, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. "This passenger threatened crew safety. I need all of you to remain calm while we handle the situation." The lie hung in the recycled air, obvious to everyone who'd witnessed the unprovoked attack. The woman, Amara, according to the manifest Patricia had checked earlier, set down the bloody napkin with practiced precision and reached for her phone, movement slow and deliberate, as if handling something dangerous. "No recording devices," Sterling barked, lunging forward to grab the phone, but his fingers closed on air as Amara smoothly pulled it back, already filming. "That's assault, and now attempted theft, Captain. Federal crimes at 30,000 feet carry special weight, don't they?" Her voice carried the kind of authority that made boardrooms fall silent, though Sterling was too consumed by rage to notice the warning signs. From seat 3B, David Martinez rose to his feet, the corporate lawyer abandoning his contracts to raise his phone in steady hands. "I'm recording this as evidence, Captain, for everyone's protection." Sterling's face flushed deeper red as he turned on this new threat. "Sir, interfering with crew instructions is a federal offense. Sit down immediately or you'll be arrested upon landing." But Martinez held his ground, years of courtroom experience steadying his voice. "Actually, documenting assault isn't interference. It's civic duty." The words landed like legal precedents, each one building a case Sterling couldn't see forming around him. Margaret Roberts, the emergency physician in 1C, moved toward Amara with her medical bag, her Hippocratic oath overriding any concern for airline politics. "I'm a doctor. Let me examine that cut." Sterling spun toward her, his control fracturing with each act of defiance. "Nobody moves," he commanded, but his voice cracked slightly. 20 years of absolute authority crumbling in real time as everyone in the cabin could feel the power dynamic shifting like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Patricia watched Sterling's hands shake as he reached for the intercom, recognizing that tremor from her father when his control began slipping, right before he'd do something that couldn't be undone. "Captain Sterling," she said softly, stepping forward despite every instinct screaming at her to stay silent. "Perhaps we should—" But Sterling cut her off with a look that could freeze blood. "You work for me or against me, Patricia?" His eyes blazed with something beyond anger now, Fear, maybe, the kind that makes cornered animals dangerous. Patricia's throat tightened as she thought of her mortgage payment due next week, her daughter's college tuition next month, 15 years of perfect service records. But then she looked at Amara's split lip, at the blood staining the pristine white napkin, and something inside her shifted like tectonic plates realigning. She pulled out her service tablet and began documenting, each keystroke a small act of rebellion. "Patricia," Sterling's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting, "I'll end your career." The threat hung between them, heavy as the recycled air they breathed. But from seat 4A, Tech CEO Robert Williams had already started streaming. "Ladies and gentlemen watching," he narrated quietly into his phone, "you're witnessing Captain James Sterling of Aura Airlines threatening his crew for documenting his assault of a passenger." The digital age had arrived in first class, and Sterling hadn't noticed until it was too late. Amara touched her phone screen twice, a motion so subtle most missed it, but Patricia noticed too, how the woman's eyes never left Sterling's face, studying him like a chess player counting moves ahead. "Captain Sterling," Amara said, her voice carrying strange weight that made the air itself seem to lean in and listen. "Would you like to know what I do for a living?" Sterling laughed, harsh and bitter, the sound of a man who couldn't see the trap closing around him. "I don't care if you're a lawyer, sweetheart. On this aircraft, I am the law." The irony of his words would haunt him later, but in this moment, he still believed them. "Not a lawyer." Amara dabbed at her lip again, the gesture somehow regal, despite the circumstances. Something far more interesting. The plane hit turbulence then, or maybe it just felt that way with tension thick enough to touch, oxygen masks staying tucked away while everyone seemed to be struggling for air. "Code 3 security situation," Sterling announced into the intercom, his voice trying to reclaim authority it had already lost. "First Officer Reed to first class, now!" He stood between them and the rest of the cabin, blocking the aisle like a uniformed wall. But walls, Patricia thought, watching Amara's fingers move across her phone with surgical precision, sometimes crumble from the inside out. The cabin door opened with hydraulic precision, and First Officer Thomas Reed stepped through, his 6-foot frame filling the entrance as he took in the scene, his captain's aggressive stance, the passenger's bloodied lip, the phones recording from every angle like digital witnesses that couldn't be intimidated or silenced. Reed had flown with Sterling for 10 years, had drinks with him at layovers, knew about his daughter Emma and the messy divorce from Sarah, but he'd never seen this version of the man who'd taught him how to land in crosswinds. "Jim," Reed said carefully, his voice carrying the weight of shared history and dawning concern. "What's happening here?" Sterling turned, and for a moment Reed saw something crack in his captain's eyes, like watching ice break on a frozen lake, dangerous and irreversible. "Tom, we have a security situation," Sterling said, his jaw tight enough to grind diamonds, gesturing toward Amara with hands that couldn't quite stay still. "This passenger threatened the safety of the flight. She needs to be restrained until we can divert to Boston." Reed looked at the woman, really looked at her, the calculated calm, the way she held her phone like a weapon more dangerous than any blade, the blood on her lip that told a different story than Sterling's words. "What was the nature of the threat, Captain?" Reed asked, following protocol even as his stomach knotted because he already knew something was terribly wrong with this picture. Sterling's pause lasted a heartbeat too long, and in that silence, everyone heard the lie being born. Amara shifted in her seat, the movement drawing every eye as she spoke with quiet precision that cut through Sterling's fabrication, like truth through shadows. "First Officer Reed, I'm documenting that at 10:47 p.m., Captain Sterling physically assaulted me after I refused his demand to leave my assigned first-class seat. He claimed I didn't belong here, suggested I was using an invalid ticket, and when I declined to move, he struck me. She touched her split lip, the gesture clinical and deliberate. Dr. Roberts here can verify the injury. Mr. Martinez and Mr. Williams have video evidence. Ms. Morrison witnessed everything. Each name fell like a domino, building a case that Reed couldn't ignore even if he wanted to. Sterling's face darkened to a shade that Patricia recognized from her emergency training, the color of a man whose blood pressure was spiking toward stroke territory. "She's lying," he snarled, but the words came out desperate rather than convincing, the sound of authority drowning in its own desperation. "You know me, Tom. 20 years we've been flying together. You're going to take some passenger's word over mine." The appeal to loyalty might have worked in the old days, before cameras and accountability, before the world changed and left men like Sterling behind. But Reed could see the phones still recording, could feel the weight of witnesses, could smell the metallic scent of blood that made Sterling's denial absurd. In her mind, Amara traveled back 15 years to a different kind of altitude, the top floor of Airline's headquarters, where she'd sat across from 3 executives who'd looked at her resume, her MIT degrees, her coding portfolio, and seen only her skin color. "We're looking for a better cultural fit," they'd said, their smiles as empty as their promises of equal opportunity, never knowing they were rejecting someone who would one day hold their corporate future in her hands. She'd built her fintech company from that rejection, turned their no into a billion-dollar yes, then quietly began buying Aura stock through shell companies and offshore holdings, playing a long game they never saw coming. The Clause 17B provision had been buried in merger documents from Aura's founding, a poison pill that nobody remembered because nobody thought it could ever be triggered. Emergency transfer of operational control to the majority shareholder in cases of gross misconduct by senior leadership. She'd paid 3 law firms to verify it still stood, binding as gravity. "Captain Sterling," Reed said, his voice steady but strained like a cable under too much weight. "I need you to return to the cockpit while we sort this out." But Sterling stood his ground, 20 years of seniority crystallizing into stubborn defiance that would cost him everything. "I'm the captain of this aircraft. I don't take orders from you or anyone else at 35,000 feet. The words hung in the air like the last testament of a dying era, and Patricia watched Reed's face change as he realized his mentor had crossed a line from which there was no return. "Then I'm obligated to declare you unfit for duty," Reed said, each word careful and clear for the recordings that would be evidence in courts and boardrooms. "Federal Aviation Regulation 91.3 gives me that authority if I believe you're compromised." Sterling's laugh was ugly and short, the sound of disbelief curdling into rage. "You're relieving me. You wouldn't even have your wings without me. I vouched for you when nobody else would." The personal attack was a mistake, revealing the desperation beneath Sterling's anger, and Reed straightened his shoulders as duty overtook friendship. Amara lifted her phone to her ear, speaking quietly but clearly enough for those nearby to hear. "Marcus, initiate the protocol. Yes, now! Full execution." She ended the call and looked at Sterling with something that might have been pity if it hadn't been sharpened by years of systemic slights. "Captain, you asked what I do for a living. I reshape companies that have lost their way. Companies like Airlines." Sterling heard the words, but couldn't process their meaning, too focused on his immediate authority to recognize the tectonic shift happening beneath his feet. "Security!" he shouted toward the back of the first class. But no one came, because Patricia had quietly warned the other crew members to stay clear, choosing her side in a war Sterling didn't yet know he'd already lost. The standoff in first class had reached critical mass when Sarah Mitchell, the off-duty pilot deadheading in 2C, stood up with the kind of measured authority that comes from 3,000 hours of flight time. "Captain Sterling, First Officer Reed," she said, her voice cutting through the tension with professional clarity. "I'm available to assist if needed." Sterling's eyes darted between Reed and Mitchell, watching his cockpit authority fracture in real time like safety glass spidering under pressure. The passengers pressed record on their devices with renewed urgency, understanding instinctively that they were witnessing something historic. The precise moment when old power structures crack and new ones emerge from the fissures. In New York, Marcus Washington stood in his corner office at Cromwell and Associates, the city lights glittering below like a circuit board, as he activated protocols that had been waiting dormant for years. The emergency clause had been his masterpiece, buried in acquisition documents with the patience of a legal time bomb, and now Amara had lit the fuse. He speed-dialed his senior partners, pulling them from dinner parties and theater intermissions with 5 words that made them abandon their evening plans. Chen Protocol is now active. Within minutes, 12 of the city's sharpest legal minds were converging on the conference room, their Teslas and town cars cutting through Manhattan traffic with expensive urgency, while Marcus pulled up the shareholding structures on his secure laptop, the corporate architecture of Amara's patient revenge glowing on the screen in interconnected boxes and arrows that all led to one inevitable conclusion. Back at altitude, Sterling felt the walls closing in, but couldn't stop himself from making it worse. His ego writing checks his career couldn't cash. "You're all conspirators," he declared, pointing at each witness in turn like a prosecutor who'd forgotten he was actually the defendant. "When we land, every one of you will be charged with interfering with a flight crew." Robert Williams kept his live stream steady, narrating for his growing audience with the calm precision of someone who'd pitched to venture capitalists and knew how to maintain composure under pressure. "For those just joining, we're at approximately 32,000 feet over the Atlantic, where Captain James Sterling of Aura Airlines has assaulted passenger Amara Richardson and is now threatening witnesses with federal charges for documenting his crime." The viewer count climbed past 20,000, then 50, then doubled again as the algorithmic gods of social media recognized drama and began pushing the content to everyone who'd ever complained about airline service or searched for viral videos. In her suburban Denver home, Sterling's daughter Emma sat frozen on her bed, watching her father unravel on her phone screen while her group chat exploded with messages she couldn't bring herself to read. "Dad, no," she whispered at the screen. But Sterling couldn't hear her, couldn't hear anything but the sound of his own authority evaporating like jet fuel in thin air. Reed made his decision with the kind of clarity that comes from simulator training, where you learn that sometimes the most dangerous thing in a cockpit isn't mechanical failure, but human error. "Captain Sterling, I'm assuming command of this aircraft. Please remove yourself from the operational area." Sterling's face went from red to purple, the color of poor circulation and worse decisions. "You can't do this. I'll have your license. I'll end your career." But Reed had already done the math. His career versus his conscience, his mentor versus his duty, the old boys club versus the passengers recording everything, and the equation only had one answer. "Jim, you struck a passenger. It's over. Don't make this worse." Amara watched it all with the detached interest of someone observing a chess match where she'd already calculated every possible move to checkmate. Her phone buzzed with encrypted messages from Marcus confirming that board members were being roused from their beds across 3 continents, that the emergency protocols were activating like dominoes falling in precise sequence, that Jared Morrison, CEO of Aura Airlines, was about to receive a call that would redefine his understanding of who actually owned the company he thought he ran. She thought about power, real power, not the temporary authority of a uniform at altitude, but the patient accumulation of leverage that compounds like interest over time until one day you can remake entire systems with a phone call. Patricia moved closer to Sterling, not in support, but in professional concern for a man she could see was spiraling toward a breakdown that would make the evening news. "Captain, please," she said softly, using the voice she reserved for passengers afraid of flying. "Let's all take a breath and—" Sterling whirled on her with such venom that she stepped back instinctively. "You're fired, Patricia. 15 years and you choose her over me? You're done. Finished. You'll never work in aviation again." The threat might have carried weight an hour ago, but now it sounded like the last gasps of relevance from someone who hadn't realized the world had changed around him. In London, Gerard Morrison's phone rang at 2:47 a.m., the specific ringtone he'd assigned to board emergencies cutting through his sleep like an air raid siren. "Gerard." His general counsel's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "We have a situation. The Richardson Protocol has been activated." Morrison sat up so fast he knocked over his water glass, the crystal shattering against Italian marble as ice-cold understanding flooded his nervous system. "That's impossible," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he remembered the name. Amara Richardson, the brilliant MIT graduate they'd rejected for being not quite the right fit, whose application had crossed his desk all those years ago with a recommendation he'd ignored. "How much does she own?" he asked, already knowing the answer would be catastrophic. 51%, sir. She's been building the position for 5 years through 17 different entities. Legal's verified it twice. It's airtight." Sterling's phone buzzed with a message from dispatch that made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. "Captain Sterling, return to gate immediately. Employment terminated pending investigation. Do not attempt to continue flight operations." He read it 3 times, his mind refusing to process words that spelled the end of everything he'd built, everything he was, everything he'd sacrificed his marriage and his daughter's respect to achieve. Around him, the cabin filled with the quiet sound of justice being served at cruising altitude, the tap of phones documenting, the whisper of witnesses comparing notes, the steady breathing of Amara Richardson as she prepared to reshape an entire airline from Seat 2A. The emergency board meeting materialized in cyberspace like a corporate seance, 11 faces appearing on the conference room screen in various states of disrupted sleep, hair askew, bathrobes over pajamas, the polished veneer of executive power stripped away by urgency and encrypted summons. Marcus Washington shared his screen with the practiced efficiency of a surgeon displaying X-rays, the video of Sterling's assault playing in high definition, while board members watched their company's reputation dissolve in real time. "Dear God," whispered Harrison Clark from his home in Connecticut, his face draining of color as Sterling's hand connected with Amara's face again in the looped replay. "How many people have seen this?" The answer came from William's livestream ticker, visible in the corner of the shared screen. 500,000 viewers and climbing exponentially, the internet's hunger for corporate comeuppance feeding on fresh scandal. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of prepared devastation. "Before you ask about damage control or spin strategies, you should know that Ms. Richardson is prepared to address you directly." The board members shifted in their separate locations, unified in their dread as Marcus's screen changed to show Amara, still in first class, her split lip visible even through the aircraft's Wi-Fi connection, blood on her white napkin like evidence in a courtroom. "Good evening, board members," she said with the calm of someone holding 4 aces. "Or rather, good morning to those of you in London and Frankfurt. I'm exercising Emergency Provision 17B from AURA's founding charter, which transfers operational control to the majority shareholder in cases of gross misconduct by senior leadership." The silence that followed could have suffocated diamonds. "That provision hasn't been invoked in 40 years, sputtered William Hayes from his study in Boston, legal texts visible on shelves behind him like props in his own defeat. "It requires—" Amara cut him off with surgical precision. "A documented act of gross misconduct by senior leadership witnessed by multiple parties. Yes. Would you like to see the video again, Mr. Hayes? Or perhaps read the witness statements already uploaded to our secure server? Mr. Martinez here is a senior partner at Fuller & Associates. Dr. Roberts is Chief of Emergency Medicine at Presbyterian. Mr. Williams runs a company valued at $800 million. Are you questioning their credibility? Gerard Morrison appeared on screen from his London home, his usual CEO Polish cracked like old paint, revealing the fear beneath. Ms. Richardson, Amara, surely we can discuss this reasonably. One incident, however regrettable, shouldn't— She smiled then, the expression sharp enough to cut glass through fiber optic cables. Gerard, you and I both know this isn't one incident. This is a culture you've cultivated through negligence and the protection of men like Sterling. How many complaints have been buried? How many passengers humiliated? How many crew members silenced with threats to their careers? Morrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, knowing she had access to files that legal had assured him were sealed. You can't just take over. Harrison Clark tried, his voice climbing toward panic. There are procedures, votes required. Marcus Washington's voice cut through like a blade between ribs. Actually, Mr. Clark, she can. The provision is clear. In cases of documented gross misconduct that threatens the company's reputation and fiduciary duty to shareholders, the majority holder can assume immediate operational control. Ms. Richardson owns 51% through various holdings. The math, like the law, is indisputable. The board members looked at each other through their screens, each searching for an escape route that didn't exist, rats on a sinking ship that had already slipped beneath the waterline. Effective immediately. Amara continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd waited 15 years for this moment. Captain Sterling's employment is terminated. Not suspended pending investigation. Terminated. First Officer Reed will continue the flight with Captain Mitchell's assistance. Patricia Morrison is promoted to Chief of Cabin Safety Training, effective upon landing. Each pronouncement fell like a judge's gavel, reshaping Aura's power structure from 35,000 feet. These are just the beginning. Within 24 hours, you'll receive my full reform package. You can accept it, or I'll dissolve this board and appoint members who understand that excellence above all means treating every passenger with dignity. Union Representative Jack Thompson joined the call, his face flushed with indignation that curdled into uncertainty as he processed what he was witnessing. You can't just fire a pilot without due process. The union contract clearly states— Amara held up her phone, showing him the viewer count on Williams' stream. Mr. Thompson, 800,000 people have watched your member assault a passenger. Another million have seen it on TikTok. Twitter is calling for boycotts. Our stock will tank when markets open unless we act decisively. Do you really want to tie your union's reputation to defending this? Thompson's jaw worked silently. 20 years of reflexive pilot protection warring with the reality of video evidence that made defense impossible. Sterling, watching his phone in disbelief as his career evaporated through corporate video calls he couldn't join, felt his legs give out as he slumped into the jump seat reserved for deadheading crew. The password to his company email had already been changed, his access to flight systems revoked mid-flight, his identity as Captain Sterling erased from Aura's databases like a ghost being exorcised. Patricia watched him with a mixture of pity and relief, remembering all the times he'd made crew members cry with his demands, all the complaints HR had ignored, all the moments when his temper had flashed like lightning before being tucked back behind his captain's bars. One more thing, Amara said, her final words falling like an executioner's axe. Mr. Morrison, your resignation will be accepted within 72 hours. A CEO who allows this culture to fester is complicit in its consequences. The board can select your replacement from a list of candidates my team will provide, all of whom understand that an airline's true first class isn't about champagne and lie-flat seats, but about treating every human being who trusts us with their journey as worthy of respect. The screens began to flicker as board members realized they were witnessing not just a takeover, but a revolution. executed at cruising altitude with the precision of a flight plan and the inevitability of gravity. The aircraft descended through 20,000 feet toward Heathrow as dawn broke over London, painting the clouds in shades of gold that mocked the darkness inside Sterling's chest, where his career had been. He sat in the jump seat like a deposed king, watching Reed and Mitchell handle his aircraft with competent hands, while Patricia coordinated with the cabin crew who moved around him as if he'd already become invisible, a ghost haunting his former kingdom. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages he couldn't bear to read, from fellow pilots expressing shock, from his ex-wife Sarah demanding explanations, from his daughter Emma whose texts had devolved from "Dad, what happened?" to silence more damning than any words. Amara opened her laptop and began typing with the focused intensity of someone architecting a new world from the ruins of the old, her fingers moving across keys like a pianist performing a composition years in the making. "Effective immediately," she spoke into her phone, recording a message that would be sent to all 47,000 Aura employees within the hour. "The following reforms will be implemented without exception or delay." Her voice carried through first class, where passengers had become witnesses to history, their phones still recording as she outlined the demolition of Sterling's world and the construction of something better in its place. In London, Gerard Morrison sat in his study, watching his company's transformation through the screen, while his resignation letter auto-generated from Amara's legal team. 30 years of climbing corporate ladders, ending with a push from the very person he'd dismissed as not quite the right fit all those years ago. The irony tasted like ashes as he remembered that interview. How he'd barely glanced at her portfolio. How he'd decided before she'd even spoken that she wouldn't match Aura's culture. A culture he now understood had been poisonous from the start, protected by his willful blindness, and the comfortable assumption that things had always been this way, and therefore always would be. "These changes are non-negotiable," Amara continued, her split lip having stopped bleeding, but still visible as evidence of the violence that catalyzed this reckoning. "Any board member who objects can tender their resignation alongside Mr. Morrison's. Your stock options will be purchased at fair market value, after the inevitable dip from this scandal, but before the recovery that will come from running an airline that treats all passengers as human beings deserving of dignity." She paused, letting the financial implications sink in, knowing that for some board members the threat to their portfolios would motivate more than any appeal to conscience. The plane's landing gear descended with hydraulic certainty as Sterling's phone rang with a call from his union representative. "Jim, I've been on the phone with legal." Jack Thompson's voice sounded hollow, defeated by reality. "With the video evidence and witness statements, we can't defend this. The criminal charges alone, assault, battery, false imprisonment, you're looking at serious time. The union's offering basic legal consultation, but—" The unfinished sentence hung like a noose, and Sterling ended the call, unable to process a world where his 20-year seniority meant nothing, where his captain's bars had become evidence tags, where his daughter would go to school tomorrow, knowing her father was the viral villain of the internet's latest justice porn. Patricia picked up the intercom with steady hands, her voice carrying new authority as she addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing at Heathrow shortly. On behalf of Aura Airlines, the new Aura Airlines, I want to personally apologize for what you witnessed today. You've seen us at our worst, but you've also witnessed the moment when we chose to become better. Every one of you will receive full refunds and lifetime platinum status as inadequate compensation for this trauma. More importantly, you've helped us prove that no uniform, no title, no amount of seniority places anyone above basic human decency." The passengers applauded, not the polite golf clap of first-class approval, but something deeper, rawer, the sound of people who'd witnessed justice served at altitude, and felt the world shift slightly toward fairness. Amara closed her laptop and looked out the window at London sprawling below, thinking of all the boardrooms and cockpits and executive suites where men like Sterling still ruled through fear and tradition, wondering if this victory would ripple outward or remain an isolated triumph. Her phone buzzed with a message from a flight attendant based in Chicago. "We're all watching. Thank you for doing what we never could." She forwarded it to Patricia with 3 words. "This is why." Metropolitan Police waited on the jet bridge as the aircraft doors opened, their presence turning Sterling's walk of shame into a perp walk, while passengers filmed his final moments in uniform, the golden wings on his shoulders catching morning light like tarnished promises. He didn't resist as they read him his rights, didn't protest as they led him away, just looked back once at the aircraft he'd commanded for 2 decades, seeing his reflection in the polished fuselage, distorted, diminished, disappearing. Patricia stood in the doorway watching him go, feeling the weight of 15 years lift from her shoulders as she realized she'd never have to choose between her conscience and her career again. 3 months later, Amara sat in economy class on Aura Flight 823 from JFK to San Francisco, her identity unknown to the fresh-faced crew who served her with genuine smiles, unpoisoned by fear or favoritism. She wore simple clothes and no jewelry, just another passenger in seat 32C, watching how the new policies played out at ground level where corporate promises met human behavior. The flight attendant who offered her coffee was young, maybe 23, with natural hair that would have been against regulations 6 months ago, and a name tag reading Destiny, with preferred pronouns listed below. Small changes that signaled seismic shifts in company culture. In federal holding awaiting trial, Sterling wrote letters nobody would read, apologies that curdled into self-pity before he could finish them, while his lawyer prepared for a case that would end with 8 to 10 years if he was lucky. The viral video played in court like a prophecy fulfilled, each frame showing the exact moment when power corrupted absolutely and absolutely fell. His ex-wife Sarah had changed her name back, his daughter Emma had blocked his number, and the pilots who'd once bought him drinks now crossed streets to avoid being associated with his disgrace. He'd become what he'd always feared, irrelevant, powerless, forgotten except as a cautionary tale told in flight schools about what happens when you mistake a uniform for untouchability. Patricia Morrison stood before 200 flight attendants at Aura's training facility, her new title of Vice President of Operations feeling both heavy and hopeful as she introduced the revised de-escalation protocols. "Some of you knew Captain Sterling," she said, her voice steady despite the memories. "Some of you flew with him, maybe even respected him. But respect based on fear isn't respect at all. It's just survival. Today we're learning a different way." She clicked to a slide showing passenger rights in 12 languages, remembering how Sterling had made her feel small, how many times she'd apologized for things that weren't her fault, how freedom tasted when you finally chose which side of history to stand on. The transformation wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is when humans are involved. Some pilots grumbled about political correctness gone mad in their private forums. Some board members whispered about the good old days when men were men and complaints stayed buried. Some passengers still demanded to see someone in charge when crew members didn't match their expectations of authority. But the numbers told a different story. Complaints down 78%, employee satisfaction up 60%, and applications from diverse candidates flooding in as word spread that Aura had become a place where merit mattered more than melanin, where competence counted more than connections. Amara's office window framed Manhattan's skyline as she read the email that made every battle worthwhile, sent from a 19-year-old black woman in Atlanta. "Dear Ms. Richardson, I saw what happened to you on that flight. My grandmother flew in the 50s when they made black passengers sit in certain sections even in first class. She used to say dignity isn't given, it's taken. Thank you for taking it at 30,000 feet where everyone could see. I submitted my application to flight school yesterday. They accepted me today. The scholarship is named after you." Amara forwarded it to Patricia with a note. "This is how change multiplies. 1 student today, 100 pilots tomorrow, 1,000 passengers who feel welcome the day after." In the end, Sterling's legacy wasn't the 20 years he'd spent commanding aircraft, but the 20 seconds it took to destroy everything with one act of violence recorded from 12 angles. His name became a verb in aviation circles. To Sterling yourself meant to let prejudice override judgment so catastrophically that you catalyzed the very change you'd spent your career resisting. Emma Sterling legally changed her last name to her mother's maiden name, went to college to study civil rights law, and never spoke of her father except to say that sometimes people have to fall completely before others can rise. The sunrise painted Aura's fleet in golden light as planes took off from a dozen airports, each one carrying the promise that excellence above all meant treating every passenger as precious cargo. That power came not from uniforms, but from understanding that everyone deserves safe passage through the sky. Amara Richardson had bought an airline with patience and planning, but she'd transformed it with something simpler: the radical act of demanding dignity at altitude and refusing to accept anything less. Sometimes revolutions begin in boardrooms with hostile takeovers and proxy fights, but sometimes they start with a woman saying no in first class and meaning it, her blood on a napkin becoming the signature on a declaration of independence from the tyranny of unchecked authority. Every act of injustice carries within it the seeds of its own destruction, Patricia would tell her trainees, holding up the printed screenshot of Sterling's assault, now required viewing in all leadership courses. The question isn't whether consequences will come, but whether you'll be the one delivering them or receiving them. Choose wisely. Someone's always recording. The camera pulls back from a familiar scene. First-class cabin, morning flight, champagne being served with practiced smiles. But everything has changed in ways both visible and profound. Where once Sterling's portrait hung in Aura's headquarters, now a plaque reads simply, "Excellence is how we treat each other." The viral video that destroyed him has been watched 50 million times, spawning documentaries, think pieces, and a Harvard Business School case study on crisis management titled, "When Power Strikes Back, the Richardson Protocol." But the real measure of change isn't in metrics or media coverage. It's in the small moments that happen every day at 30,000 feet. A young black woman settles into seat 1A on a flight to London, her newly minted pilot's wings gleaming on her uniform, and no one questions whether she belongs there. A flight attendant named Marcus, whom the old regime would have deemed too flamboyant, leads safety demonstrations with infectious joy that makes passengers actually pay attention. An elderly Sikh gentleman boards with his wheelchair, and instead of impatience, he's met with genuine assistance and respect. These aren't publicity stunts or corporate theatre. They're what happens when a company decides that its values will be lived, not laminated. Sterling serves his time in federal prison, where he teaches literacy to other inmates, not from any genuine redemption, but because it reduces his sentence. His letters to Emma go unanswered, piling up in a P.O. box she'll never check. Sarah remarried a pediatrician who treats her with the respect Sterling never could muster. The man who once commanded the skies now mops floors and counts days. His greatest fear realized. He's become nobody, remembered only as a cautionary tale about what happens when privilege mistakes itself for permanence. But this story was never really about Sterling. He was just the catalyst, the chemical reaction that exposed what had been corroding Aura's foundation all along. It's about Amara Richardson, who turned rejection into revolution, who understood that real power isn't wielded like a weapon, but built like a fortress, stone by patient stone. It's about Patricia Morrison, who chose courage over comfort and discovered that standing up straight feels better than bending to bullies. It's about every passenger who lifted their phone to record, transforming themselves from bystanders into witnesses, proving that in the age of accountability, injustice can't hide at any altitude. The questions that matter aren't comfortable ones. How many sterlings still walk among us, protected by seniority and systemic silence? How many Amaras sit quietly planning their revelations, waiting for the moment when preparation meets opportunity? How many Patricias stand at crossroads between security and righteousness, one decision away from changing everything? And perhaps most urgently, when you witness injustice, will you be Robert Williams with his live stream, or one of the passengers who looked away, choosing comfort over conscience? Power is like altitude, Amara told a gathering of business leaders 6 months after the incident, her scar barely visible but never hidden. The higher you rise, the thinner the air becomes, and some people forget how to breathe normally. They forget that gravity applies to everyone, that what goes up must come down, that the only question is whether you'll land or crash. The audience shifted uncomfortably, each wondering if they'd built their success on sustainable principles or Sterling-like presumptions. What happened on Flight 715 wasn't unique. It was uniquely documented. Every day, in offices and restaurants, in hospitals and hotels, in countless interactions between those who have power and those who don't, similar scenes play out without cameras rolling. The difference now is that we all carry courtrooms in our pockets, that every abuse of authority is one upload away from judgment, that the distance between action and consequence has collapsed like the gap between Sterling's palm and Amara's face. Sudden, shocking, irreversible. The invitation isn't comfortable, but it's clear. Examine your own altitude. Question whether your authority serves others or just yourself. Ask if you're creating cultures where Sterlings thrive or where Patricias can stand tall. Consider whether you're building companies that people endure or environments where excellence actually means something. Because in the end, we're all passengers on the same flight, and turbulence doesn't check ticket class before it hits. If this story resonated, if it made you angry or hopeful or determined to be better, then share it, not just with your network, but with your conscience. Subscribe not just to hear more stories of justice served at altitude, but to the principle that dignity shouldn't require documentation, that respect shouldn't need recording, that every passenger through life deserves safe passage regardless of which cabin they can afford. Comment with your own moment of choosing sides, of standing up or staying seated, of being Patricia or being silent. Because tomorrow, somewhere between ground and sky, another Sterling will raise his hand and another Amara will decide whether today is the day for patience or power. Another Patricia will choose between paychecks and principles. Another plane full of witnesses will determine whether documentation leads to transformation or whether injustice flies on, unchallenged and unchanging. The question that echoes through every cabin, every corridor, every moment when power meets vulnerability is simply this. When your moment comes, and it will come, which character in this story will you choose to be? The one who strikes, the one who stands, the one who records, or the one who reshapes entire systems from seat 2A? Excellence above all means choosing wisely. Someone's always watching, history's always recording, and gravity, like justice, remains undefeated, even at cruising altitude.